Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this introduction to ACT Online Prep Live with the ACT and Kaplan. My name is Boris. I'll be your on-camera teacher for the next hour and 15 minutes, but one thing I should say as part of our introduction to the Online Prep Live class is that I am not the only person here, and I'm not the only one trying to do my best to make sure that you have an awesome experience and get some good practice for your upcoming ACT. I am joined behind the scenes by some amazing ACT instructors. So Stephanie's here, and Heather, and Joe, and Crystal. Kieran is here as well. So there's a whole team of amazing ACT teachers working behind the scenes to make sure that you can get your questions answered and learn as much as possible in the next hour and 15 minutes. Also got to give a shout out to Greg and Chris on the tech team who are making sure that everything works smoothly and the stream does not implode on all of us. Now, our goals in this first session is to do two things mainly. One is to give you an introduction to the format of the Online Prep Live class so you can decide if it's the kind of thing you'd like to do to prepare for your ACT. The other, though, is to teach you some stuff. We're going to go through all four sections of the ACT. I should say all four scored sections: English, math, reading, and science. In that order, we're not doing the essay today because it's not scored on the 1 to 36 scale. So we'll do all four scored sections of the ACT and teach you some strategies from each. Now, I can't promise you that, in an hour and 15 minutes, you will become a master of all four sections. There's definitely a lot more math and English stuff, that you'll practice before you take your test on June 10. But it'll at least give you a sense of some things you can start doing right away to improve your ACT score. And it'll, again, give you a sense of whether you'd like to take a whole class that's in this style to prepare for your exam. So let's go ahead then and start in with the English test. Now let me know in the chat real quick as my first question to you of the night. For you, where does English rank compared to the other sections of the test? So do you find it one of the hardest, one of the easiest, sort of in the middle? Maybe you don't know yet because you haven't really started practicing at all. Where does English rank for you currently? So for most folks, English is one of the less worrying sections. So it is kind of long. You have 45 minutes to answer 75 questions. You got to go pretty quickly through it to actually finish that on time. But for most people, that's not really an issue because a lot of these questions are pretty quick. So the nice thing about the English test is that whether it's a strong section for you or a good section for you, it should be a nice boost of confidence for your ACT prep. If you're great at it, then doing practice on English can help boost up your confidence before you tackle one of the sections that maybe you're not so great at. And if you are not strong in English, it's a really great section to practice. Sure, there are some really tricky strategy questions and whatnot, but a lot of the questions just test grammar rules. So like you get a question wrong, and then it's like, oh, that's what a semicolon does. And then now you can get that question right in the future. And you've learned something that you know is going to help you get more points on test day. So it's a really great section. I highly encourage you to practice it at least a little bit, whether it's a confidence area for you or one that you're currently a bit afraid of. Now, speaking of what is tested on the English test, you'll see a variety of topics. There will be very casual passages. There will be academic passages. But obviously, this is more about writing strategy and grammar than reading comprehension. There's a whole separate test for that. So your strategy for English will be the same regardless of the topic that you see or the style that it's written in. What is important to note is the different types of questions. A lot of people assume going into the test that all the questions are grammar. And yeah, there are definitely grammar / syntax sort of questions on the English test. But you'll also see questions that test your knowledge of language. So do you know the right word to pick for the sentence? Which word creates a logical meaning? And then the hardest ones for me are the production of writing questions. These are the ones that ask you, should you include this information? What would be the best way to introduce this paragraph? Stuff like that. That has nothing to do with grammar at all. It's totally about writing strategy and logic and critical thinking. So even if you're a grammar wizard, you definitely want to do some English practice because for those production of writing questions, chances are that's where you're currently missing an opportunity to get some questions right. Now, in our short sample session today, where we cannot teach you everything, but would like to teach you something that you find really useful, we're going to start by reviewing commas, which are most people's #1 trickiest bit of punctuation. I know for me, in high school and college, I was just always guessing about commas. Let me know in the chat if you feel the same way, where it's just like, this feels about right. Yeah, let's drop a comma in there and feel completely not the slightest bit confident about it. I love where this paper is going. right? It's very, very tricky sometimes because it feels like it's sort of subjective, like should there be a comma or not, kind of depends on feeling. So that is something I'd like to correct, because one of the things I learned was after I became a Kaplan teacher is that, like, wow, commas are actually really concrete. There's 4 rules for commas. There's 4 things that commas are used for. So once you know what those 4 things are, and sure, it might take some work to memorize it, but once you learn what those 4 things are, you never have to guess again. And that's just not great. That's not just great for the ACT, it's great for everything. All the writing you have left to do in high school and all of your essays in college. Every time you come up with a sticky situation and you're not sure if a comma should be used, you can go through this list and be, okay, is this one of the 4 situations? Because if it is, use a comma. If not, don't use the comma. I see we got some different opinions here. Becky says, I hate commas. Oh, I love to see that, Becky. So hopefully, that'll be one of the nice things for you coming here tonight is that, on your test, if nothing else, you're going to feel a lot more confident about any question that tests commas. Now, Adam asks a very advanced question. Does the ACT believe in the Oxford comma? Yes. So if you are strongly anti the Oxford comma, you will have to sell your soul, sacrifice your principles, give up your morals, and make sure you use the Oxford comma on test day to score those sweet speed points. Okay, so let's go through the 4 things that commas do, and then we can be sure we can get these questions right on the test. All right, first thing, commas are used to separate items in the list of 3 or more things. So if you have 3 or more things in a list, you should use commas after the first, 2 items if it's a list of 3. Basically, everything but the last item should have a comma after it. So that's one thing, lists. The other thing that commas do is they use a conjunction to connect 2 complete sentences. If you check out this example, I work on Mondays, that is a complete sentence. And I have soccer practice on Tuesdays. That is also a complete sentence. We got 2 complete sentences here, so we can connect them with a comma and a conjunction like and or but or yet or something along those lines. Commas are not strong enough to hold 2 complete sentences together by themselves. So if you do that, that is called a comma splice, and that is one of the mistakes you might have to fix sometimes on ACT test questions. But as long as you've got a conjunction to go with the comma, you can hold 2 sentences together. So we're now at 2 out of 4. One thing commas do is lists. Another thing commas do is connecting sentences. And a third thing commas do is adding non-essential information into a sentence. Now this is what I call, and this is not a standard ACT term, this is a Boris term. I call this the comma sandwich. So basically, I am sandwiching information into the sentence with a comma before it and a comma after it. Like this, Azara found, much to her delight, that the hours she spent studying were worth the effort. This is a very topical sentence. Of course, it will apply to you in your ACT prep. But check it out. If I get rid of that parenthetical phrase, the sentence actually works. It says, Azara found that the hours she spent studying were worth the effort. So it works just fine without that extra stuff. So if I want the extra stuff in there, that's okay. This little phrase, much to her delight, but I have to make sure I put a comma before it and a comma after it, and then I have my comma sandwich. Okay, that's 3 things out of 4. The last thing that commas do is they set off an intro or modifying phrase. So if you check out this sentence, after school, Mindy has to go straight to band practice. Notice that after school is not a complete sentence. That comes nowhere close to having a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. So when you have that, you can attach it to a complete sentence with a comma. You can see this. Mindy has to go straight to band practice. If you look at that, that would be a complete sentence all by itself. Remember, we said that commas were not strong enough to hold 2 complete sentences together, but a comma can and should hold a complete sentence to an incomplete sentence, a phrase. So, on test day, whenever you see a comma either in the underlined portion of an English question or in one of the answer choices, you should ask yourself, is one of these 4 things happening in this situation? Do we have a list? Do we have 2 complete sentences held together? Do we have non-essential information? Or do we have a modifying or introductory phrase attached to a complete sentence? So if we have one of those 4 things, we should use the comma. If we don't have any of those 4 things, we should not use the comma. Now I'm about to go to a question, and I know when I show this question on the screen, some of you are going to instantly know what the answer is. It is a lower difficulty question. So that's great. On the ACT, of course, if you see a question and you just, your gut feeling, you just know the answer, then great. Go ahead, pick the answer and move on with your life. That's totally fine. But for now, try this approach with me that I'm going to use on this question, even again if you instantly see the answer, because when you get to those really hard questions and you ask your gut, hey gut, what do you think the answer is? And your gut's like, I don't know, they all seem good, then you need to have some kind of a backup plan. And as long as you're not getting a 36 on the ACT English test, you got to be getting some questions wrong. Those ones that you're getting wrong are the ones where you need some kind of a strategy to get through the really difficult concepts. And practicing that strategy on the easy questions is a great place to start. Okay, so we don't have a poll for you guys at the moment. We are working on getting a poll up and running for you so you can vote on the answers to these questions. But for now, let's just go ahead and take a strategic run through this problem. It says the greater the pressure from the wind causes bonds to form more quickly at the downward edge than in the rest of the snowflake. Okay, so we have a comma here. And one of the answer choices doesn't have a comma. Two of the answer choices do the comma differently. So our first step should be determining whether we need the comma at all. So we ask ourselves, okay, do we have a list of things? No, we don't have a list of things, right? There's no list here. Do we have non-essential information? Well, that can't be. We got to get rid of non-essential information. That's absolutely impossible because for that we have to have a comma sandwich, which means we have to have two commas, and there's only one comma here. And the answer choices that move the comma around still have only one comma. So it's not a list, and it's not a comma sandwich. That means that we're either holding two complete sentences together, or we are holding a phrase to a complete sentence. Now tell me please in the chat, how many complete sentences are needed to express the idea of what is written? Like how many complete sentences or complete thoughts do we have in this situation? Well, there's just one. This whole thing expresses one idea, which is that at the downward edge of the snowflake, bonds happen more quickly because there's more pressure from the wind. So there's just one idea. So we're not holding two complete sentences together because there's only one. And we don't have a phrase attached to a complete sentence either because there is no introductory phrase or anything like that. It's just one single idea. So we've run out of boxes to check, right? There's no list, there's no comma sandwich, there's no complete sentences being held together or a phrase being held to a complete sentence. So we know we don't need the comma. And so as strategic test takers, we can eliminate any answer choice that does have a comma. So A, B, and C are all instantly gone, and we know we can grab choice D for domination. Happens to be one of my favorite ACT choices. Let's grab that choice and get out of here. Notice how with this approach you can be extremely confident and know for certain that you have picked the right answer to that question. That is a really, really good feeling on the test. When you pick a choice and you're like, yeah, I totally nailed it, you get momentum, you get a confidence boost, you can push back some of that test anxiety, and if you can build up those moments throughout your test thanks to your preparation, it's really going to help you do well, to perform your best on test day. All right, I love the memes from Davis there. We are the number one, absolutely. So let's grab this choice and get out of here. Now, let's take a look at one other rule in the ACT, and this is subject-verb agreement. This is interesting on the test because the test makers know that everybody knows how verb conjugations work in English. If you've ever taken a foreign language like French, Spanish, or God forbid Latin, you know that English is really, really easy when it comes to conjugating verbs. All right, it's really, really simple. Like I am playing golf, you are playing golf, they are playing golf. Everybody knows this. This is not hard in English. So you're not likely to see a whole bunch of answer choices or a whole bunch of questions on the ACT where it's like, what's the right way to do this sentence? Is it they is playing golf, they be playing golf, or they are playing golf? Like, no, everyone would get that question right. What the test makers will do instead is acknowledge that you know how to conjugate verbs, but make the question tricky by making it hard for you to find the right subject. So this is where the test makers can probe your deeper logical understanding, and I'm going to show you that with this question. According to geologists, a fossil fuel deposit of truly game-changing size, whether a giant pocket of natural gas trapped within a shale formation or an enormous reservoir of crude oil deep beneath the ocean waves, have become increasingly difficult to discover, if any even still exist. Okay, so we've got just one word underlined. It's have. It is a verb. So as a strategic test taker, you have to ask yourself, what is the subject of this verb? So you tell me in the chat, what is it that have become increasingly difficult to discover? Michael says, I love this teacher for saying memes. Absolutely. Not a day goes by that I don't hop onto Reddit and check them out. So here, what happens to be increasingly difficult to discover is a fossil fuel deposit of truly game-changing size. Very nice. Becky, you caught that. I see some other folks as well. Excellent. So what's the right verb here for a fossil fuel deposit of truly game-changing size? Oh my goodness, lots of folks. So Fred, Marker, Namara, Kevin, and lots of other people. Great job here. What verb should we use for a fossil fuel deposit? Well, it is a fossil fuel deposit, right? A is singular, so we need a singular verb, and we of course know that the singular verb is has, not have. So we're going to go ahead and eliminate choice A and grab choice C for champions, also a spectacular option on the ACT. Please note that the question is written in a very deliberate way. Notice that the word waves appears right before the verb, and waves is plural. So this is one of the ways that test makers can make a question like this challenging. By having a plural word right before the verb, it makes your brain feel okay about having the verb have, because waves have become increasingly difficult. Sounds good. But it's not the waves that have become increasingly hard to discover. I mean, I don't know about you. I can go to any beach and see plenty of waves. It's pretty easy to discover those. If someone thinks waves are harder to discover, that person probably has some problems. It's the fossil fuel deposit that we're having a hard time finding. So strategically, you can avoid this mistake by always asking yourself when you see an underlined verb, what is the subject? All right, folks, nice work there on these English questions. Please don't think that we are, done with English forever. Obviously, there's a lot more lessons in our online prep live program in which we go over the, tricky, the more difficult logic-based questions about strategy and go over all the other grammar rules you need to know for the test. And if you're prepping on your own, you'll have more to prep. But this gives you an idea of some of the type of instruction that we have and some of the things that you can practice to get really good at this portion of the exam. Now let's give math a similar treatment. We're not going to be able to go through all of the math content that you'll need for test day, but we'll be able to review a few of the things and also see how the ACT assesses your mastery of those topics. So in math, tell me please in the chat about how much time do you have per question on average? We have, on the math test, 60 minutes to answer 60 questions. And it's okay if you look at the screen to find that information, because we don't expect you to know everything coming in. That's why you're here. We hope is to learn some things you didn't know. So that means you have as much minutes as you have questions. That means you've got 1 minute per question on average. Now, a little bit of timing strategy, because math does tend to be a section that some folks have trouble finishing on time. It's okay if you spend a bit more than a minute to solve some of the harder questions, because some of the easier questions you'll probably solve in less than a minute. But if you're routinely spending, 1.5, 2 minutes to solve every math problem, what that means is not that you are slow. It means that there is some math that you have not yet mastered. I know a lot of students, I've seen this come up a lot, feel slow or stupid when they take the ACT math test. And I want you to fight off those feelings because they're logically inaccurate. If you're not finishing on time, it's not because you're slow, it's because you do some of the questions inefficiently, or you spend a lot of time trying to figure something out that you can learn through outside preparation so that when you see the question in the future, you instantly know what the right thing is to do or the best way to solve the question. So focus on your practice. Don't beat yourself up over your speed. If you get good at math or the math the ACT tests, then the speed will come for free. Of course, that leaves the question, what math does the ACT test? I'll show you really quickly here on the screen. These are the topics tested. What it mainly boils down to is Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, plus some skills that you maybe more as closely associate with science class, so things like modeling or integration of essential skills. That means like reading tables and graphs, stuff that you don't have like a special class to learn, but are sort of these outside skills that are related to math. So as far as your high school math classes go, we're looking at Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, which if you're a junior or a senior, you've probably taken. So a lot of your preparation is going to involve, brushing off those cobwebs and learning some formulas and things you might not have seen in a long time. So we'll do a couple of those. We'll brush off a few cobwebs today. We're going to start with quadratic equations. So this is an upper level algebra topic, definitely something you'd see in Algebra 2. And we need to be able to do two things with these quadratics. We need to be able to expand them using a process called FOIL, and we also need to be able to undo that. We need to be able to hit the rewind button and make the FOIL go backwards. So let's review FOIL. It's been a while, don't worry. That's the whole point of being here, is to review it. All right, we are not going to punish you or make you feel bad for not knowing something. We want you to not know something so that we can teach it to you. And then you can get a higher score on test day, and then everybody wins. So FOIL stands for first, outer, inner, last. And you use this when you expand binomials, like this one, x plus 2 times x minus 3. Well, folks, tell me please in the chat, what do I get in my F step when I multiply the first terms of each of the parentheses? Well, in this case, the first terms are the x's, so when I multiply them together, I get x squared. So the first part of my answer will be x squared. The next two steps are outer and inner. So outer here is going to be x and negative 3, and inner will be 2 and x. So tell me please in the chat, what is my x term going to be in my final answer? When I do outer, I'm going to have negative 3x, and when I do inner, I'm going to have 2x. When I add those together, because they are like terms and they can be combined, I will have negative x. So that's why my next term here in my answer will be negative x. And we're on to the L in FOIL, the last. Tell me please in the chat, what will be the last part of my answer? The last terms here are the 2 and the negative 3. 2 times negative 3 is, of course, negative 6. So we're going to end this up with a negative 6. So there we go. We have x squared minus x minus 6. And you're definitely going to see at least a few questions on the ACT in which it's important for you to go from the left to the right using FOIL. That might not be the whole question, but it's likely to be part of the process of getting to the answer. You're also likely to see some questions where you have to go backwards. And that happens when you have a quadratic equation like this one. X squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. Let's say you want to know what x is. Who wouldn't want to know what x is, right? I'm always curious. But when I look at this equation, it's really kind of unclear what x has to be, because my usual techniques of doing the same thing to both sides, blah, 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 can't get x by itself, because there's one of the x's that's squared and one of the x's that isn't. So in order to figure out what x is, we're going to have to reverse FOIL, or factor. To do this, we need two magic numbers. Okay, the two magic numbers we need are numbers that multiply to give you the number on the outside, in this case 6, and add to get you the number in the middle, in this case 5. So folks, what are the two magic numbers in this situation that multiply to 6 and add to 5? Got to give some shout outs here. A few folks, a lot of you guys have had some great math, but I've noticed Tiffany, Tamara, Matthew, Anastasia had some fantastic math here. So thank you guys so much for your work and your participation in the chat. In this situation, our two magic numbers are, of course, 2 and 3, because 2 times 3 is 6, and 2 plus 3 is 5. And so we can say this is x plus 2 times x plus 3. Now, if this is equal to 0, then now it becomes really clear what values of x solve the equation. Real quick, tell me please in the chat, folks, what could x be that would make this equation equal to 0? Well, negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So if x is negative 2, we're going to have a 0 times something, don't care what it is, that's going to be 0, we're good to go. If x is negative 3, negative 3 plus 3 is 0. And again, 0 times, I don't care what the other part is 0, and we're good to go. So that means that x can be either negative 2 or negative 3. There's actually two different numbers of x that would solve the equation, and reverse FOILing gets you both of them. So it's a super duper handy technique, because we went from not having a clue what x was to knowing all the things that x could possibly be using one technique. Now Nick, who is a fantastic person behind the scene, is letting me know that the poll is now up. So for the next question, if you finish before we all finish together, feel free to pop your answer in the poll that you see on your screen. And that way you can let us know that, like, hey, I got this, Boris. It's easy peasy, pumpkin cheesy. I'm ready for some more challenges. Here we go. What's the sum of the two solutions for x in the quadratic equation, blah? Okay, so we got to definitely solve what for x. Clearly, that's what this question's telling us. We have to know what x is. Now, we have this quadratic, and we remember our technique from before. We're looking for two magic numbers that multiply to give us the number on the outside and add to give us the number in the inside. In this case, that's a 1, right, because the x is by itself, so we'll say that its coefficient is 1. So tell me please in the chat, what two magic numbers can you think of that would multiply to negative 56, the number on the outside, but add to 1, the number in the middle? It's got to be the same two magic numbers for both of those requirements. And while you guys are coming up with that, there's a great question earlier actually from Hannah. Hannah was wondering, can I just plug it into the quadratic formula? Absolutely. So if you prefer to use the quadratic formula, go for it. On the ACT, you always have to do whatever works best for you. So if you see something in one of our classes and you're like, oh, that's awesome, I want to do that, then do it. But if you're like, oh, you know what, I feel more comfortable doing it my way, then great, do it your way. It's got to be the way that's going to get you the answer fastest. All right, so in this particular case, our two magic numbers will be positive 8 and negative 7. And it might seem a little weird that I'm saying positive 8, like who says positive 8, right? But for these problems, I urge you in your mental dialogue to say that because there will be mistakes. There will be answer choices in the test that represent mistakes of putting the negative on the wrong number. So you, in this particular situation, want to be very careful about where you put your positive and where you put your negative. Positive 8 plus negative 7 is 1, so I want my 8 to be positive and my 7 to be negative. Now then, what are the solutions for x? What values for x actually cause this equation to equal 0? Now the shoe is on the other foot, right? Now we want the 7 to be positive because 7 minus 7 is 0. And we want the 8 to be negative because negative 8 plus 8 is 0. So our answers for x are either 7 or negative 8. Which answer choice, please vote in the poll to represent this, actually answers the question? We've got our solutions for x, but now I'd like you to vote in the poll for the one that answers what the test makers want. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of votes coming in for choice C, which makes sense because 7 plus negative 8, we take our two possible values for x and add them together, is negative 1. So that's our answer. We're going to grab C for champions and skadoodle. Now I also saw some folks going for choice D. D is the choice that you'd get if you did negative 8, or sorry, if you did positive 8 plus negative 7. Notice how I said before that if you mix up your negatives, there might be a mistake waiting for you. There it is. Choice D is like a special delivery for that error. Now, I want to talk at this moment about mistakes, because if you're anything like me, your attitude about mistakes is not so good. When I was prepping for the ACT back in the day, you know, anytime I made a mistake, I would beat myself up. I would get really, really frustrated. Even if I wasn't beating myself up per se, I was just annoyed that I was getting the question wrong. Now, you multiply this out over a few weeks or a few months of preparation, and that can really, you know, wear down your mental fortitude. It can really lower your morale and make you less encouraged to study and just feel less positive about the whole thing. And that's bad, right? You don't want to beat yourself up because there's enough pressure in the world without you adding to it. So my advice is, when you get something wrong, just be like, oh, whew, dodged a bullet. Thank goodness I made that mistake in practice instead of making it for real on the test. Right? And that's a much more positive, more optimistic way of looking at the same thing. And also, it's actually good if you think it's good that there's choices like D on this test, right? Because imagine if choice D wasn't there and someone who's less prepared than you got 1 as their answer. Well, then they'd look at the answer choices and be like, oh, 1's not here. I must have made a mistake. And then they might be able to figure out the mistake, and then they might get the question right in the end. And so that way, they're like on par with you on the test. But if choice D is there, then someone who's not as prepared as you, someone who didn't work as hard for their great ACT score, is just going to pick choice D, get the question wrong, and move on, and now you're ahead of them. This is a scale test. Your score depends entirely on how many more questions you get right than your competition. So you want to be getting questions right that other people are getting wrong. So the more traps there are for other people to, you know, fall into and make a mistake, the higher your score will be. So delight in these mistakes that appear in the answer choices, and delight in your own mistakes that you make when you're practicing, because it's only going to help you get a higher score on testing. As Simon say in the chat, mistakes build character, lol. Yeah, and the best part is they also build a higher ACT score. It's just a win all around. Now we're going to jump from quadratic equations to a totally different topic, triangles, just giving you a little bit of a sampling of some of the material that we review in our course, just to get you, give you a feel for how it's like to learn in online prep live. So for triangles, one of the things that we review is that the interior angles of a triangle always add up to 180 degrees. Maybe you remember that from geometry class, maybe not, doesn't matter, right? Now you know. And so now with just that one little fact, you can get questions right like this one. What's the degree measure of the smallest interior angle of triangle DEF below? Now you don't need to write out the whole equation because I know it's a little bit long, but tell me please in the chat if you'd be so kind, strategically, what do I want to do with all of these variable angle measures? Well, I know that I have a triangle, and I'm given something for all three of its angles, which means that I need to add those angles together and set them equal to 180 degrees. That's what this equation is doing. We've taken all the angles, we've added them together, and they must equal 180. Why? Because the angles of any triangle equal 180. That's the cool thing about math. Even if you're not a mathophile, even if math has not been your strong subject in school, I don't want you approaching the ACT thinking, oh, math is going to wreck me. No, that's totally not true. Because on the ACT, a lot of the times, the concepts are tested in the most fundamental way, with an emphasis on your critical thinking skills and a de-emphasis on like really, really hard, grindy math. So even if math wasn't a great subject for you in school, you can still do a really nice job on the ACT. Like here, you learn one little property and you're on the way to the answer. So here, I'm not going to make you do this. I know you can do it. You can combine like terms. You can do 2 plus 15 plus 16 and get 33. Subtract it from the other side. And now we divide both sides by 7. We get x equals 21. Now, is this the final answer, folks? Is x equals 21 the final answer to the problem? Well, no. Choice A is 21, and a lot of people will pick this on the ACT. You're not going to be one of those people, though, because it's a darn shame to basically solve the problem but get it wrong because of a small mistake. The test makers didn't ask what is x, they asked what is angle DEF, and DEF, this is the smallest angle of triangle DEF, and the smallest angle, of course, is just x plus 2. So we have to add 2 to it, and that is choice B for Boris. Now, choice C for champions, choice D for domination, great answers, but I humbly think that B for Boris is the greatest ACT answer choice of all time, so I'm very happy to pick it here and move on. There's a great reminder from Trevor, you have to plug it back in. Exactly. Now, I know some of you are getting angry, some of you are shaking your fists like I used to do, and be like, oh, ACT, that's so dirty. But again, if you made that mistake here, just now add it to your, repertoire of habits. Whenever I finish a math problem, I'm always going to ask myself, am I done? Okay, am I done for real? Is this the final answer? Just make that a habit after every question. Once it becomes a habit, you're never going to fall for this mistake again. But a lot of your competition will make that mistake and pick choice A, and now you're ahead of them on ACT score. It's all a good thing in the end, as long as you're one of the people preparing and not one of the people who's not preparing. And presumably, if you came here on a Tuesday night when you have enough going on in your life that it would have been very easy to justify just taking a break, but you're like, no, I'm going to spend an hour and 15 minutes, see what this thing's all about. So you're like, on a school night prepping for the ACT in your spare time, I'm guessing you're one of the people who's going to prepare. So for people like you, the presence of these sorts of mistakes in the choices is only going to help your score. All right, folks, that's it for math for today. Of course, not forever. Let's move on with the ACT. The next section after math is reading. And with reading, the thing that we have to talk about here, I obviously won't be able to talk about everything I'd like to about reading comprehension in one session, but the main thing I want to talk about to you guys is time. Because a lot of people are concerned about the time on the test. You have 35 minutes to answer 40 questions. That's less than a minute per question, but also you have to read the passages. So you don't even have a minute per question raw, and you on top of that have to have time to read 4 relatively long passages and finish. So a lot of people just have a really hard time. A lot of people have a really, really hard time getting it down to under 9 minutes to do a passage and 10 questions. Okay? And so what a lot of people then do is one of two things. They either, complain and think, oh, the ACT should allow more time for reading, or they kind of beat themselves up and say, well, I'm a slow reader, so I don't have a chance because I'm a slow reader. In fact, let me know in the chat. Have you ever felt like you're a slow reader and that's holding you back? Did you ever leave a practice test thinking, man, if only I was a faster reader, I would have totally been able to do this test? I see one person mentioning in the chat, 8 minutes per passage. That's insane. Let me share a few thoughts with you guys. All right, here's something to think about. Like I said before in math, this is a scaled test. You're not being graded objectively, like just objectively how well did you do. What you're being graded on is how well did you do compared to the other people who took the same test. So you got to think about it like there is nobody in the world who's like finishing the ACT going like, man, there is way too much time on this reading test. I have finished the questions, I knitted a sweater, I wrote a PhD thesis, I traveled the globe, came back, and boy howdy, there's still so much time to spare. Why do they give us so much time on this test? Like, no one's like that, right? Everybody's having trouble with the time. So if everybody's having trouble with the time, that means on average people aren't doing that well in the reading test. So you can make a few mistakes yourself and still get a good score. And conversely, if it was a hour-long test, then everybody would have more time to read all the passages thoroughly, read all the questions thoroughly. Everybody would get more questions right. So to be in the top 10%, top 5%, top 20%, whatever you're shooting for, you'd have to work even harder. You have to get even more questions right because everybody would be doing better. On standardized tests, which are always scored on a scale, a factor that helps everybody helps nobody. Because if everybody gets more questions right, then nobody's score improves. So you don't have to really worry about this time limit. That leaves the other question. Do I have to worry about my reading speed? Am I at a disadvantage compared to people who read faster? Well, let's think about that. Tell me please in the chat, have you ever had this experience where you've gotten to the end of a paragraph and you realize you have no idea what you just read? Like your eye was literally just moving across the page and inputting words into your brain, and your brain was not processing any of those words, and you kind of wake up a little bit when it's like, oh, time to jump to the next paragraph, and you realize you have no idea what you read. It happens a lot. So then what do you have to do? You have to read the entire paragraph over again. People don't fail to finish on time because they read slowly. People fail to finish on time because they read inefficiently. They read and they don't pick up what they read. They don't process it, they don't understand it, and then they have to read it all over. Or people get anxious because there's so much information they can't possibly memorize it all. So that causes them to lose focus. Or they lose focus because the passage is kind of boring, and so then they're not processing what they're reading. Or maybe they lose focus because they're just, feeling overwhelmed for some reason. So there's a lot of reasons why people lose focus, and losing focus makes you read inefficiently, and that's what's really costing you the time. I'm going to make you a promise here tonight, folks. If you learn how to read efficiently, and I'm not saying you just do that on the drop of a pin, it'll take some practice, but if you can learn how to read efficiently, you can read slowly and do way better than like anyone who reads faster than you. Because reading faster is not going to help someone who's not understanding the passage. At the end of the day, you got to answer 10 questions, right? And you can read as fast as you want, but if you don't understand the passage, if you're rereading everything 5 times over because you keep losing focus, you're not going to do well. So read slowly, learn to love your reading speed, embrace your reading speed, but learn how to read efficiently, and that's how you're going to finish the section on time. So the question becomes, how do we read efficiently? What exactly does that mean? Well, that means you pay attention to the big picture, but you don't pay attention to all the nitpicky details. So as you read, you want to focus on the main idea of the passage without worrying about all the nitpicky details. The logic behind this is very simple. If there's a question about one of the nitpicky details, you can go back to the passage and look it up. But if there's never a question about some nitpicky detail, then good thing you didn't bother learning it in the first place. This, for me, was like, an aha moment that had a huge effect on my reading. For the ACT, for all other standardized tests, and honestly, even for college too, is just realizing that like sometimes I was struggling so hard to memorize every detail, it was causing me to panic and not understand anything I was reading. But once I let go of that drive to understand it all, I could be a lot more comfortable. And I'm going to model that for you. I'm going to show you that with a short passage, how this can really work, how paying attention to the big ideas and ignoring the little details can help you do better on this test. So let's check it out. In the past, scientific consensus was that the separation of functions within the brain, okay, let's pause here. Right off the bat, I know what the topic of the passage is, just from reading like half of the first sentence. Tell me please in the chat, what is this passage about? This is a good grounding question to ask yourself, because you don't want to get halfway to the first paragraph and already be on the wrong foot, zoning out. Before reading too long, you ask yourself, what is the topic of this passage. And here, the topic seems to be the separation of functions within the brain. So I'm going to make a quick note here. I'm going to write separ with a period, because I don't need to understand this 5 weeks from now. As long as this makes sense for the next 8 minutes, I can use a shorthand and be as abbreviated as I want. So it's about separation within the brain. Now it says, separation of functions within the brain, blah, 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 was a uniquely human trait. Let me pause here for a second. All right, supposedly this was the thought in the past. So what do you guess is the case now? Like if in the past, everybody thought that the separation of functions was uniquely human, what's probably the case now? Oh, I see actually a lot of you guys use a different annotation for this first paragraph, which is great. A lot of you guys wrote brain functions, which I didn't think of, but that's awesome. I'm going to use that instead since that seems to be the popular choice. Great. By the way, the notes I take, these are not set in stone. They're not carved into rock by thunderbolts from the heavens. You know, you should use whatever notes make sense to you so that you can understand the big picture of the passage. And I see a few folks were asking about underlining. Underlining is okay, but you'll be amazed how much more comfortable you feel about these passages when you actually write a couple of words. I'm not saying, by the way, like write a master's thesis here. Just a couple of words per paragraph, here and there, just a few seconds, not taking away too much time. Because when you write, it helps your brain understand the passage better. And thinking like, what is like the main idea? Like synthesizing the passage into those couple of words helps you understand the passage better in the first place. So there's a good question, by the way. I see a lot of folks are asking this, so I want to pause for a bit and answer this, because oh man, there's a lot of you asking this. This is like a hot button topic. Drew, as one of the people who wrote this, why not read the questions first, then read the answers, or then read for the answers? That is an amazing question, Drew. I like the way you think, because that is some strategic thinking, right? Read the questions, then I can look for the answers as I read the passage and be super efficient. Well, what scientists have found is that in short-term memory, human beings can hold only like 5 to 9 things at once. Right? That's just, what we found, brain science, right? Can't do anything about it. That's just our limit, 5 to 9 things. Now there's 10 questions. So right off the bat, you can tell the math is not in our favor. But on top of that, you obviously need some short-term memory as you read a passage to like keep track of what's going on, focus on the main idea, whatever. So you're going to run out of short-term memory really fast. You're just not going to be able to juggle 10 of those questions and understand the passage well enough to answer them if you go for that approach. Now, if there was only one question, then yes, read the question first and read for the answer. If we were aliens from the planet Zorblax who can hold 57 things in short-term memory, then yes, just use 10 out of your 57 slots to remember the questions, and then you can use your other 47 short-term memory slots to remember the passage, and then that's great. But because we are not Zorblaxians, we got to go for this other approach instead. Read the passage efficiently, take a few very brief notes as you go just to make sure you understand the main idea, and then when you get to the questions, once you realize what the question's asking you about, you can go back and do targeted research in the passage to quickly find the answer. Now here, we're told that in the past, there was something that was a uniquely human trait, so that you'd probably guess maybe it's not anymore. You don't need to make a note about that, but I urge you to ask questions as you read, to guess what's coming next as you read, to guess what the author thinks. Because if you're having that inner dialogue, you ask yourself questions, guess what's coming next, that means you're paying attention, you're engaging with the passage. And even if the passage is super boring, even if this does not interest you at all, you can essentially life hack, like make yourself interested by forcing yourself to ask questions and guess and kind of turn the passage into like an ongoing puzzle. That's one of the things that really helped me get to grips with boring passages, because in my head, I can ask questions, trash talk the passage and make anything fun, and then I'm not going to be zoning out. So let's keep going. It says about 90% of humans are right-handed, implying the dominant hemisphere for most motor functions. Who cares, right? I do not care about the hemispheres of the brain, so I'm reading this on test day, but I really don't care. Researchers have observed this tendency at all stages of life, even prior to birth. Clearly, there's some kind of genetic predisposition involving the separation of hemispheres of the brain. I don't care, right? I know what the topic is. It's, like you guys said, brain functions, all right? So, yeah, this is just a bunch of science about brain functions. Who cares? If there's a question about it, I'll go back and really pay attention. But if there's no question about it, thank goodness I didn't waste any time or energy on test day trying to get this all jam-packed in my head. Now, the last sentence brings up a new topic. So take a look at the last sentence for me, please, and let me know in the chat. What's kind of a change in the main picture of this passage that's introduced in the final sentence of paragraph 1. Well, here we have something new. We have animals, right? So the real question that the author asks now is, what about animals? Do animals have this brain separation? This is like a rhetorical question. Now, you know, on the ACT, whenever the author asks a rhetorical question, the author's going to have to answer it. So you're guessing that maybe the next paragraph will have some information about animals. So you tell me, all right, do animals have this brain function separation? Well, it sure looks like it. It says the evidence that a left brain, right-handed preference for everyday and activities occurs in nearly all vertebrates is mounting. Okay, so great. So we're going to go ahead and just write like yes. Animals also have this brain function stuff going on. And after that sentence, we do have an interesting word. So this is one of those words that might make you perk up a little bit and say, well, this isn't just a whole bunch of science facts. There is something interesting here, and that's the word however. The word however indicates a change in direction or a shift. So whenever you see one of these words like however or but or nevertheless, you might guess that, okay, maybe there's like an important change here. So tell me please in the chat, what is special about humans? So yes, animals also do the separation, but what's special about humans? Gotta give a shout out to Becky in the chat, who's extolling left-hander power. I am right-handed. I've always wished I was left-handed though, so I could be different. I've always liked being really different from other people, but I'm like a boring old righty. So, but props to you, Becky, for left-hander power. And yeah, here we learn that humans are pretty extreme. So humans have a very extreme preference compared to other animals for this brain separation. Exactly, Montalis. It's more extreme. Vincent, yeah, humans have a preference, right? So, you know, animals have a preference, humans have a preference, but humans have like a really, really extreme preference. And then it says this disparity is probably due to a combination of factors. So as a strategic reader, when you see this is probably due to a combination of factors, you know that you're probably now going to get a whole dump of science explaining why humans have this extreme preference. So you can read it, and I don't ever recommend skipping the text or skimming the text. You should read it, but you can read it. But what reading efficiently means is you know it's important to pay attention to, so you pay attention to that. But then when you read something and you know it's not important, you don't pay attention to it as much. So yeah, you'll read this, you know, most likely the use of tools and the continued reliance on fine motor skills for the everyday tasks of humans force the right-handed preference to become increasingly favored. Genetics may have started humans on the path to left brain dominance, but other factors must have been important to produce the extreme bias we see in human brains. Okay, so that's explaining why humans are so extreme. You read the facts, but you don't get overwhelmed by them because you know that the facts aren't important. This is what's going to separate you from your competition on the ACT. Most people who come to the test, they're going to read this entire paragraph and pay attention to every single word. And you maybe have had this experience before where you're like reading and you start to get a little tired, and then there's like one more fact. You're like, okay, I'm about my limit here. Please, no more facts. And then there's another fact. And you're like, oh man, I'm about to burst. And then there's another fact. Oh, stop. And then there's another fact. And your brain just explodes because you just can't handle all the facts. Well, once you realize that you don't have to handle all the facts, you don't have to memorize them or internalize them. You can just let it go by. Okay, whatever facts. And then only care about them if a question asks about them. It makes it a lot easier not to lose focus as you read the passage. Then you're an efficient reader and you can get through this in a reasonable amount of time, even if your reading speed is a little bit on the lower end. Now let's go ahead and answer some questions. All right, so this question says, what's the main point of the passage? Well, as long as you've been doing the strategy we've discussed, which is paying attention to the main point of the passage and not focusing on the details, it's not too hard to pick out the answer that describes the main point of the passage. In fact, I invite you to vote in the poll now for the answer choice that you think correctly expresses the main idea of the passage that we just read. Wolverine says brainplosion. I love that, and I love that you are here named Wolverine. Excellent choice. Here, The main point of the passage, if we had to say it ourselves, was something along the lines of like, humans have a really extreme preference, but humans and animals all have this brain function separation. So it's something along those lines. You always want to go for like a really short paraphrase of the passage. I imagine that like one of my friends is like watching TV and they like turn like, "Hey Boris, what's that passage you're reading about?" They don't really care. They're just being polite and their attention span is very short. So I've only got a few seconds to explain it. If you can give that kind of really short, really punchy paraphrase, that ensures that you yourself understand the passage. So it's about brain separation. Humans have it, animals have it, humans are extreme. Okay, so let's take a look at our answer choices here and see one that gives us a nice match. Most folks are voting for choice B for Boris, and how could you not? It's a great answer choice. It says the specialization of the hemispheres of the brain has a complex origin. Well, that fits pretty well because the last paragraph of the passage, like half of it, was explaining why humans are so extreme in their brain separation. And it also talked about like why humans have this left-handedness and why animals have it. So pretty much the whole passage was about that. That's a solid choice. Let's grab that choice and get out of here. Now, reading comp is interesting because a lot of people think that there's good choices and better choices. That's not the case. If I can leave you with like one other reading comp idea tonight, if I never see you again, it's this idea that there's one right answer and the other three are wrong. If you're arguing with the test, you're wrong. You're missing something if you think more than one answer choice could be correct. So focus on that in your practice. Just say, okay, I'm wrong. What am I missing? What was it about this choice that I thought was correct that is actually making it unambiguously an incorrect choice? The most common wrong answer choice here was choice A, so let's talk about that. It says, studying handedness is crucial to understanding brain chemistry. Now, in order for this to have been the correct answer, the author would have needed to talk about studying brain chemistry. But the author never actually did that. The author never talked about like understanding brain chemistry or what it takes to study brain chemistry. The author was just giving us facts in the topic of brain chemistry. The other problem with choice A is it's kind of backwards. The handedness is used as an example to show the author's point about separation of brain function. It's not the important thing that the passage was about. It was just an example the passage used to support its main idea that the brain is separated and each hemisphere has a different function. So it kind of mixes up the function of a detail in the passage, saying it as though it's like the most important thing that we're trying to study. So for those reasons, we can definitely eliminate choice A and keep on looking through our list of choices till we find choice B. All right, folks. Nice work on that first question. Let's take a look at one more. This is a little different type of question. It says, it can be inferred from the passage that no species has ever displayed ... Now here, the word inferred is your clue that this is going to be among the more challenging questions of the test. Because this is an inference, meaning you have to deduce the correct answer from the passage. The passage will not come right out and tell you the answer directly. So we'll have to check the answer choices very carefully against the passage to see if we can deduce them, even though they weren't said explicitly. Let's start with choice A, a preference for left-handedness. Okay, can we deduce from this passage that no species has ever had a preference for left-handedness? Well, at the top of paragraph 2, the author says that the evidence that there's a right-handed preference for nearly all vertebrates is mounting. Nearly all. It doesn't say all. So it's possible that there are a few vertebrates that do have a right-brained, left-handed preference. So we can definitely eliminate choice A because it is extreme. It's not something that we can prove from the information in the passage. The opposite of choice A is still possible given the facts in the text. So that's hard. I'm not going to lie to your face here and say this is easy. This is hard. It takes some practice to do. You have to do some very careful analysis of the relevant portions of the passage to determine if these choices are right. Let's take a look at choice B. It says a 95% preference for right-handedness. Well, let's take a look at the numbers in the passage and compare them to 95. So in the first paragraph, find it for me, please, if you'd be so kind. What percent of people have a right-handed preference? It's in the 5th line. It says about 90%. Okay, so about 90% of humans are right-handed. And remind me, please, in the chat, what do we know about humans and their right-handedness compared to other animals? Well, in the middle of the second paragraph, we had a note reminding us that humans are pretty extreme. In other words, humans are the most extreme of all the animal species. It says no animal, none, has shown as extreme a preference as humans. So humans are the ones that are the most extreme with right-handed preference. Now we got to put these facts together. If humans are at 90% and humans are the most extreme, then can there ever be a species with a 95% preference? No, it cannot, because as Lay put it very nicely, it's more extreme. Yeah, so B is impossible. There is no way that any species could ever have had a 95% preference, because that's more extreme than humans, and humans are the most extreme there is. If humans being the most extreme are the most extreme at 90, then there's no way that anyone who's less extreme could be at 95%. That just defies basic math. So B has to work. We can deduce it. It wasn't in the passage directly, but we can deduce it by combining information and solve this inference question. Now, before I move on, I do want to mention choice C, because this was the most popular choice in the poll. And I just want to thank you guys for using the poll. It's such an awesome tool for you to be engaged in the lessons, and also for us to know like what choices you think are worth looking at so we can review those. CS has a preference for using both hemispheres of the brain equally. Now this goes back to the same thing as choice A. Remember in the passage it said that nearly all vertebrates have this preference for right-handedness, which means it is still possible that there are some species out there that have a left-handed preference or equal preference for both hemispheres. Nearly all is not the same thing as all. There could still be some exceptions. So for that reason, C is out, and we got to grab choice B for Boris once again. All right, I see a comment from Samantha. Samantha says, this definitely has built my confidence for the test. Ah, Samantha, I am so happy to hear that, because I know it seems like a fruity thing, but confidence is something you should actively work on leading up to the ACT. Obviously, you got to know stuff. You can't just do well on the test if all you have is confidence. But confidence is a really important ingredient, because if you're held back by anxiety and you don't believe in yourself, it can cause you to basically score less than the score that you deserve. So if you can say, okay, I've prepared, I know how to do this stuff, I have a good strategy for answering the questions, and remind yourself of all these true facts, you can beef up your confidence, and that will actually help you score higher. Now, the last thing I'm going to do in this session is review a little bit of science with you. And before I do, let me actually answer, there's a great question, by the way, because Sharon and Julie are both asking, like, how are we supposed to do this in such a small amount of time? Believe it or not, you're going to do this in a small amount of time, because now, as I'm explaining everything for the first time, it takes a while. But on the ACT, after you've practiced like 100 passages, you're going to be like, oh, let's see, okay, inference question, got to make sure no species can do it. A, check, research, nope. B, check, research, oh yeah, that can't work. And then you're out of there in 45 seconds. Meanwhile, a question like this one, you can answer in about 10 seconds, because you know the main idea really well, and it's easy for you to pick something out. So I don't know how to tell you like how you're supposed to do it. All I can tell you is that with practice and a good strategy, you are going to do it on the ACT. We've worked with thousands of students who have dramatically increased their reading comp scores, and the reason is that it's possible to finish the section on time and get a lot of those questions right. All right, guys, let's check out science. This is the 4th section of the ACT. Also, timing is a bit of a concern. You got 35 minutes to answer 40 questions spread out over 7 passages. So this is also a section where you have to work efficiently, because if you don't have a good strategy going in, you're going to waste a lot of time doing things that don't really matter, and you're not going to get an investment on the time spent. So let me show you a little taste of what you will do when you see the science passages to make sure that you are efficient. There's 3 main types of passages. We're going to focus on the first type, which is interpretation of data. This is the most common type of passage, and this is the one that will include graphs, tables, or some other form of data that you'll have to interpret to answer the questions. So, while there are a lot of different ways the data can be represented, you will actually be able to do the exact same thing for all the data that you see to be efficient and to be confident in your answers. So let me go over what those three things are. The first thing is variables. All right, the variables are what the scientists are controlling and what they are measuring. And usually the independent variable, which is what the scientists control, will go on the x-axis. And the y-axis will have what we call the dependent variable, which is what the scientists measure. Now, you don't need to memorize these terms, but you do need to understand this idea in an experiment that there is something that is controlled and there is something that is measured. Now, tell me please in the chat, when you look at variables, what else is really, really important to consider to make sure that you do not miss? In addition to the variables, like what the variables are, you have to pay attention to the units, because that's super important, right? Like, so the variable might be something like volume, but volume can be measured in cubic liters, cubic milliliter, or not cubic, sorry, can be measured in liters, milliliters, decaliters, kiloliters. I mean, there's lots of different ways to measure volume. Length could be measured in meters, feet, inches, centimeters. So you want to make sure you look at the units in addition to the variables, because that will allow you to avoid some wrong answers. It's not uncommon on the ACT for there to be a question or two that you'd get right if you pay attention to the units, but if you misinterpret what the units are, there will be a choice there waiting for you that is incorrect. And finally, look at trends. Okay, trend is a fancy word for patterns. So in general, what's happening as one variable goes up? Does the other variable go up too? Does the other variable go down? Is it random and there's no relationship? So a lot of times what happens with people in the science test is they read all the text really thoroughly and they spend forever looking at the graphs because they're freaking out. Like, oh no, it's science. I got to look at this graph and look at all the data points. But that's not efficient. Efficient on science means you find your variables, you find your units, you find your trends, and you check out the questions. So let's do it. All right, we're going to check out a not actually very easy example. So we're not giving you like a softball here. This is going to be some legit practice. All right, so here's some text and a figure. Now, one thing that you may enjoy doing, and I definitely do this all the time on science, is I just jump to the figure first. And if the figure makes sense, I don't read the text because the figure makes sense. That's what the questions are most likely going to be based on. But if there's something in the figure that doesn't make any sense, well, then I'll go back and read the text to see what I might have missed. So you tell me in the chat, folks, what is the independent variable? The variable that the scientists directly manipulated. Remember, the independent variable usually going to be on the x-axis. So in this case, that is temperature. But as a strategic test taker, you know it's not enough to just say temperature. You also want to think about the units. So in this case, the units are degrees Celsius, and it would appear that each tick mark in this graph is 20 degrees Celsius. I urge you always to look at intervals because it's a big difference if every tick mark is 20 degrees or 10 degrees or 1 degree or half a degree. That dramatically affects how you read the data. That means then that the measured variable, the dependent variable, is solubility. And again, pay attention to the units. The units here are grams of solute per 100 grams of water. And in this case, the interval, meaning the distance between tick marks, is 40. So 40 grams of solute per 100 grams of water between any two of these tick marks. That all makes sense to me. Looks like looking from the chat, it all makes sense to you guys. Great. So we understand everything from just looking at the figure. No need to read the text. Let's take a look at a question. Approximately how many grams of NaNO3 could be dissolved in 25 grams of water at 90 degrees Celsius? Okay, so we're looking at the graph. We definitely want to focus on NaNO3. And we need to look at 90 degrees Celsius. So tell me please in the chat, if I do a little bit of cross-referencing here, if I draw a line and see where it intersects, 90 degrees and NaNO3, then roughly what does the solubility end up being? Well, if I draw a line up from 90 and I hit the curve where it says NaNO3 and then I go over, I end up getting to 160. Now, this is 160 grams of solute per 100 grams of water. So we're going to do our little thing on the ACT. We're going to check to make sure our units are correct. So if I say 160 grams per 100 grams of water, do I have the right units for my answer? Well, it says here per 100 grams of water, but the question specifically says per 25 grams of water. So that means that my units are wrong. 25 is a quarter of 100, which means that the real answer is going to be a quarter of the answer that I read from the graph. So a quarter of 60 is going to put me up to choice B for Boris, which is 40. Of course, we had to know it was going to be 40 because this is the last question of the night, and it is B for Boris. We have to end on that, right? We can't do anything else. So there it is. We got to grab this choice and move on. Now, there's a great reminder here from Garrett. Garrett summarizes this perfectly. He says, because it has to be per 25 grams of water, which means to divide by 4. Now, I know a lot of folks are like, oh, this is ridiculous. ACT, how dare you? That's, fighting dirty. But again, don't be mad at the test for having these mistakes built into it, because you're not going to make those mistakes on test day. You're making them right now in practice. You're getting them out of your system. But your competition is going to make those mistakes, and that's how you're going to get a higher score. That's how you're going to get more questions right than the people competing with you for college admission spots. You want there to be these sorts of mistakes on the ACT, and you want to make them in practice so that you don't make them on test day. So don't beat yourself up. Don't beat the test up. Just learn how to do this right in practice so that you can enjoy the fruits of your work on the actual test. All right, folks. Great work here for science. I saw a few of you, by the way, in the chat mentioning that, science is a scary topic, and then someone else responded, it's like, well, science just feels like, as Paul said this, I feel like the science test is just reading with a bunch of added things intended to confuse us. Science on the ACT does not really test science in like a traditional high school context. So in a high school science class, you have to know things. You have to know how many electrons are in the p orbital, and how do you balance this chemical equation, and what's the 7th element or whatever. You don't actually need that on the ACT science test because you have all the information you need. Just like in reading comp, all the info is in the passage. In science, all the info is in the passage and the graphs. So you have all the information that you need. What you need to practice then is your reasoning ability. So again, kind of like what I said with math, even if science is not your best subject, do not go into the science test with a hung head. All right, don't go into your preparation for science thinking you can't do it, because you can. It's really different from high school science class. You can learn these reasoning skills and get a great score. All right, folks, that is it for our practice questions. The last thing I'd like to do is let you know a little bit more about the Online Prep Live program. And also, if you stick around to the end, there's actually a discount code that you can use if you are going to enroll. Make sure you stick around for that so that you can save some money on your enrollment. So most of the questions you have about Online Prep Live, I think, have been answered by just being here tonight. So basically, all our live sessions work just like this, where we have someone on camera, some people off camera answering questions and stuff like that, and going over the material. I teach for Online Prep Live. I taught this just the same way that I would teach a class. So if you went through some of these, snippets of practice for English, reading, math, and science, and you thought, wow, that's pretty cool, I'd like to prepare for the whole ACT, sort of like that, that's what Online Prep Live is. So I think you probably know what the online live component, the classroom component, is like. The main thing I want to let you guys know about is what you get outside of the sessions. Because in addition to these sessions, you also get some really great resources from the test makers of the ACT. That's one of the things I like about teaching this, is I know that all the resources that students have to practice with outside of class are made by the test makers, the people who make the actual ACT. So the resources, the practice problems are guaranteed to be realistic and useful for your prep. So in addition to being able to go to the live classroom sessions, you also get a lot of official ACT practice. You can also view recordings of classes that you miss. If you can't make a session, you can check out the recording for it and be totally all caught up. The online resources from the test makers are really cool. You can get personalized study plans there, and you can also reach out to Kaplan's ACT teachers and get questions answered on a moderated forum. So if you have questions about your homework or things that you're not sure about outside of class, you can actually join a forum exclusively for students in Online Prep Live and ask questions there and get expert support. So we kind of help you during class, but also outside of class with the questions that you have. I also want to mention this program is totally free if you have a fee waiver. So if you are someone who is taking the ACT for free because you got your fee waived, this program is free. I honestly don't know why there aren't thousands of people in every class for Online Prep Live, because there are thousands of students who have these fee waivers and not taking advantage of this program, which is like 28 hours of live instruction, totally for free, is pretty crazy. So definitely do this. It doesn't literally cost you nothing except for your time to do the prep if you have that fee waiver. So a part of the practice resources include a lot of practice questions written by the test makers, so they're very realistic. All the questions that we use in class appeared on previous real ACTs. There's also 2 full-length practice tests and 4 short tests that you can use to assess your abilities and review and improve on the things that you need to improve on. So that's some of the outside stuff that you have as part of your components for the course. Yes, the live sessions are great and fun, and you have really great teachers teaching everything, but behind the scenes, outside of class, you have expert support through the test maker's website with lots of practice questions, and like I mentioned before, the forums where you can ask questions and get expert help from Kaplan teachers. So if you're curious about the prices and how to sign up, the way that you can sign up is either as a bundle with your test registration, or if you've already registered for the ACT, you don't need to register again. You can go back into the test maker's website, act.org, and add the Online Prep Live to your registration for the test. And also, if you're doing ACT Online Prep right now, you can upgrade that to Online Prep Live from your Online Prep application. So these are some of the rules about, or not rules, but some of the facts about registering, and the pricing is here. So basically what you do is you pick how long you want to enroll for Online Prep Live. If you enroll for 6 weeks, it's about $100. If you enroll for 12 weeks, it's this price, minus 20% if you use the code EVENT to get a discount. And if you're looking for a 24-week subscription because you really want to prep for the ACT for a long time, so you're taking the test next fall, then you can use that price again at a 25% discount using the code EVENT. So for those of you who are enrolling in a 12-week or a 24-week course, please make sure to use the code EVENT to save yourself a 20% or a 25% discount off of the price of the course. Now there's some great questions in the chat, and I will answer some before we head out this evening. We have a few minutes left to go, so please keep asking your questions. I know Stephanie and Crystal and Heather and Kieran are answering them all, but I'll answer a few as well in case you guys are curious. So Emily is asking around how many people are in each live session. It varies from somewhere between 5 and 30, depending on what the session is and how close it is to test day. So for online, it's pretty small. Like tonight, we had about 500 people or so. So we had a pretty big group, and it was very boisterous in the chat. And then so you can put that in perspective, when you have like 5 to 30, it ends up being a very, very cozy group, and it's easy to get all your questions answered. David was asking, are there sessions that have specific subjects? Yes. Each of our hour-long sessions is focused on one of the tests. So it'll be an hour on English, an hour on math, or on reading, or on science. And there's multiple of these sessions for each of the 4 sections of the test. So in English, there's a session on conventions of standard usage. And then there's another session on writing strategy and organization. In science, there's a section on the conflicting viewpoints passages, and there's a section on data interpretation, and so on. Math, obviously, all the different areas of math, algebra, geometry, stats, and probability, they get their own session. So that's how we organize the course. There was a comment here from Adam. Adam saying, I was very skeptical about this session, but now I'm sure that this is one of the biggest ACT study helps available. Thank you all very much. Whoa, Adam! Well, if there's anything we love to hear, it's that we were able to exceed expectations. So Adam, thank you for giving us a shot, even though you weren't quite sure going in, and I'm glad that you really enjoyed it. That's what we're really trying to do. I was very excited about this partnership between Kaplan and the ACT, because a prep course with live instruction for $100 is a really great price, and it's just one of those things that wouldn't have been possible without a partnership with the test makers. So if you look at any other prep company, including Kaplan's, right? If you look at ACT live instruction, it's pretty expensive. It's definitely an investment. It's worth it, I think. But being able to do that live instruction for $100 and have it be really helpful is something that I'm really proud to participate in. So Adam, I'm glad that you enjoyed it, and thank you for sharing your warm comments with us. Simon says, seriously, thank you. I was really worried about the math. Ah, Simon, you are very welcome. I'm glad I could increase your confidence on that. And again, let me just say, a high math score is not limited to people who love math class in high school, because the math test on the ACT has got multiple choices. So it includes the ability to use strategy to answer some of the questions, even if you're not sure on some of the math. And a lot of the math topics that get tested are tested at a fundamental level with critical thinking and logic. So the test makers are more interested in, okay, can you use this basic property to solve a creative question than what you typically do in high school math class, which is, can you use a whole bunch of advanced properties in a really straightforward way? So instead of giving you complicated stuff that you use in a straightforward way, the ACT gives you basic math concepts that you use in a creative way. So if you're willing to learn strategy and be creative, you can learn just a smidgen of math and get a good score. There's also a comment from Cecilia here. Which subscription comes with the fee waiver? Good question. It's basically any of them. So it's not a matter of like, how much time you have. It's not like with the fee waiver, you're limited to 6 weeks. If your ACT is free, Online Prep Live is free. So that's really, really cool things. And I mean, seriously, if you're taking a fee waiver and you're taking the ACT and you're not doing Online Prep Live completely for free, I do not know what you're doing. Please come do Online Prep Live. It's the best free preparation for the ACT you can find because it is the only free live preparation that you can find. And so it's just an amazing resource. There's a great question here from Chase. How many nights a week is Prep Live up? That is a really good question. So typically, again, that varies depending on how close we are to the test. The closer that we get to the test, the more nights a week that we have. But typically it is on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights. And we also have weekend sessions. So pretty much everything except for weekend nights and Fridays where we have sessions when we're operating at peak capacity close to the test. All right, folks, we are past the quarter of the hour, so let me just say again, thank you so much for coming. We know that you could have done a whole lot of other things with your hour and 15 minutes this evening. We really appreciate you guys coming down here to take control of your future, invest in your success on the ACT, and see what Online Prep Live is all about. If we never see you again, then honestly, I just wish you the best of luck in your prep for the ACT and the best of luck on test day. So please, however you work hard and get the great score on test day that you deserve. If you guys end up coming back and doing some more Online Prep Live with us, then I really look forward to seeing you in the classroom to help you get a really great score on test day. Take care, everybody. Have a great evening.